And we adopted some legislation a few years ago which provided an alternative to approvals for when you're working in more than one jurisdiction to submitting soil and erosion control and stormwater management plans.
Senator Hanger, can we?
Yes, you got a substitute. You want that? Yes, I do have a substitute, if y'all would adopt that.
You distribute that. Motion properly seconded to adopt substitute. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Substitute's before us.
As a matter of clarification, Mr. Chairman, I would say to the members that the substitute doesn't do anything differently than the original bill, but it does pick up some additional sections because, as you're aware, we passed legislation a few years ago to consolidate some programs, and some of the regulations don't go into effect until July 1 of this year. And so this bill addresses both areas so that there will be uniformity. Mr. Chairman, with the committee's indulgence, I'd like someone to speak to this bill briefly if you've got time for that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Shannon Varner here on behalf of Resource Environmental Solutions. They are a company that is involved in the mitigation banking business, doing restoration in wetlands and streams, species, and as Senator Hanger said, and nutrients. Such a wide variety of areas where they do work. One area where there's a growing interest is in stream restoration, not necessarily for impacts associated with the development, but in order to help reduce nutrients and sediments for purposes of MS4 permits or for stormwater regulations. As Senator Hanger said, since about 2006, DEQ has been authorized to approve annual standards and specifications for wetland and stream mitigation banks, but only those types of banks that are used for specific permits for impacts to those resources. This would just add the authority for them to approve those kinds of standards and specifications for stream restoration when that stream restoration is done for nutrients or sediment reduction.
Okay. Any questions of the patron or the witness? Do you have others that would like to speak to this, Senator Hanger?
Not specifically, no, I don't.
Okay. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on behalf of this? Not, is there anyone in opposition? Anybody who's got a motion? Motion properly seconded to report the bill, and this shouldn't have to go, no, this doesn't have to go to finance, does it? Does not. Motion properly seconded to report the bill. Clerk, please open the roll. Okay, that one reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next amendments to propose to this particular measure, Clerk, do you have these amendments? Okay.
Is there a substitute? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess before you adopt the amendments, if I could just give you some context on this. This particular measure is, I guess you would call it an environmental measure, but it involves different parties, constituencies within the environmental group, and I guess it's in the aftermath of some tough decisions that had to be made as far as transferring certain property, to use that word, already in open space land use that were required to be substituted. In this instance, it was for a pipeline that was coming through. But the point of it is, in looking at it, we wanted to make sure that the appropriate interests were being served when something like this was being considered. With the amendments, I think we basically have agreement amongst parties that have been looking at this. There is still a little bit of concern or hesitancy, I guess, that I've assured the parties, and they've agreed that if it needs an additional clarifying amendment, that if we advance it to the House, that they would offer it over there to get the total comfort level for all the stakeholders. But I assure assure you, Mr. Chairman, this has been the subject of a lot of conversation between all the stakeholders in trying to come up with an appropriate solution for this to basically make sure that we're evaluating these opportunities appropriately with the appropriate level of concern for the conservation and intent of landowners as they put their land in certain uses, but also allowing opportunities when necessary to make this difficult decision for swapping out land. Mr. Chairman, essentially that's it, as there may be people here that would want to speak to it.
Let's, if we could have staff report those amendments. I know you passed them out, but for the benefit of the public, it would be good if we reported those amendments first.
Mr. Chairman, there are 3 line amendments, and the first one is on line 19. After the word "the," we're going to strike the remainder of line 19 and through "to the" on line 20. So that is striking "the applicant for conversion or diversion shall submit to the" is all stricken.
Okay.
That's the first line amendment. Line amendment number 2 is also on line 20. After the words "public body," insert the phrase "may require the submission of." So that sentence will read, "The public body may require the submission of 1 materials." And the last line amendment on line 34, after the word "land," we're just going to insert a new sentence that reads, "The monies for the creation of such fund shall be provided by the applicant for conversion or diversion."
Okay, is there a motion on the amendments?
I move those amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Second. Motion properly seconded to adopt the amendments. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it.
And Mr. Chairman, I certainly want to, if there are those here that, to make sure I've stated this correctly in terms of the conversations they've had that want to speak to it, I would certainly want them to speak to it now.
Are those here that would like to speak in opposition or concern first? I don't think so. Anybody want to speak in support of it?
Mr. Chairman, there's been a lot of conversation on it, and I think I was trying to make sure you understood there was still a little bit of hesitancy that there was a need to clarify something, but they were willing to go ahead and basically allow it to proceed, and we'll have a further conversation, which will involve specifically, I think, Delegate Lee Ware on the House side, who's done a lot of work with these types of easements and conservation lands.
Okay. All right, if there are no questions of the patron, is there a motion? Is there a second? Motion properly seconded to report the bill. I'm going to ask the chairman of finance, did this one need to go to finance?
I'm not aware that it would, Mr. Chairman. There are no state funds or appropriations involved with this.
Okay, motion properly seconded to report the bill. Clerk, please open the roll. Okay, that one reports as well, Senator Hanger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final one is Senate Bill 950, and Mr. Chairman, I would share on this particular bill dealing with the Department of Environmental Quality Review of pipeline construction, upland impacts, and supplemental reviews. It was not quite ready for prime time today, but in deference to your scheduling and the need to move the agenda today, I've worked with DEQ, and they are in a position, I believe, if they would like to offer some clarifying and technical amendments to help this bill along with the expression that the administration would be interested in supporting it if we can adopt those. We were in a quandary, Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, about what to do about that, and this does have to go to finance. So I would certainly encourage the members if we want to discuss this
Chairman,
now and then send it.
just tell us briefly you give us a
Sure.
little, yeah, I understand, and I apologize for being sort of unflexible and holding these passing these bills by, but we got a lot of coal ash bills next meeting we need to deal with, and I didn't.
Right, and that is fine, Mr. Chairman.
At the same time.
Basically, it is an effort to allow or require, in this instance, some additional oversight from the Department of Environmental Quality for activities related or associated with federally regulated natural gas pipeline projects in areas, upland areas, such as I deal with up in the valley and through the valley there and other sensitive areas where there is some possibility that result in a discharge to state waters that would not necessarily be covered by Federal Clean Water Act certification. So it differs from the bills that Senator Deeds had in that this requires a review in those sensitive areas, basically to require some approval and certification for those sensitive areas. There is one element of the bill that DEQ specifically wants to address, which I'm agreeable to, but they don't have their amendment here right now, because you have to be careful, because in an interstate pipeline, such as we're talking about in this instance, FERC, the feds have overriding ability to approve, and so we have, the sensitivity was there that if we in fact tried to put something in here that would essentially override FERC's ability on this or their approval process, then we'd be in violation, I guess, of some constitutional issue there.
Federal preemption.
Beg your pardon?
Federal preemption.
Right. So that's what Director Paler wants to address in part, so that we have something that would be functional for him. And other than that, it is basically additional review, which a lot of the citizens throughout the Commonwealth, particularly in the areas that I represent in Western Virginia, want to ensure, not to impede. In fact, it potentially, I don't think, other than giving more objective criteria for the State Water Control Board and those making these decisions, I don't think there would be any impediment to the current two pipelines that are under review, other than the fact that it would be basically giving them more objective criteria.
So DEQ supports the concept. You all need to work.
They support the concept with their amendments that would remove that little problem I have in there.
So then I guess what I'm hearing is you'd like to see this bill reported, re-referred to Senate Finance, and you can work on those amendments along the way and get it.
That is correct. That is correct. Right.
Let's see, is there anybody who opposes this first? Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, David Clark representing the Virginia Oil and Gas Association. We're not opposing the bill, but we are not in a position to support it at this point. We have been scrutinizing this bill. I think the committee knows there have been a lot of pipeline bills introduced this year that we've been working on, including the two that you dealt with earlier with Senator Deeds. We'd like the additional time to review this and also to consult with DEQ about the changes that we're hearing they would like to make. And so if you're going to, if this committee will to send this to finance, we'd look forward to the opportunity for a little bit more time to work on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to speak with a concern or an opposition to it? If not, do you have folks that would like to speak for it, Senator Hanger?
There are people here that can speak for it, but if the committee is predisposed to send it on to finance, we won't take the committee's time.
I think that's what.
Okay.
All right. Motion properly seconded to report the bill and re-refer to Senate Finance. Clerk, please open the roll. Wow, you got all of them today.
15
How about
ayes, 0 nays.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.